Hello and welcome, my name is Sarah and I create more tutorials for The Sims 4. In today's video we're gonna go over tests and modifiers. I also want to say it is storming outside, so if you hear the rain in the background, that's why. Anyways, let's just dive into it. Now I opened the TDESC builder and I created a new loot action file, so you can easily find it in the TDESC over here, and then go to actions and select loot actions. Now I have placed them in my favorites. You can easily do that by clicking on the star over here. Now tests can actually be placed on almost everything. For example, if you have an interaction that you only want to be added to a certain trait, you can easily do that by then going into, let me find an interaction. So let's say you have a super interaction, which is a animated interaction. And then it always takes some time to load. So it's been 5 minutes, it's still loading, but anyways, in these super interactions you can add tests into the test globals, which then just means that every single test needs to be completed in order to have that interaction happen. So let's move back to loot actions, where I have prepared this file. Now in loot actions, when you create one, you have loot actions, run tests first, and tests. Now the loot actions we should be familiar with. This just means anything that could be given to a sim. In this case I have added a payment loot in here and a buff as well. Now I just selected a random buff from the game, so don't worry about what kind of buff that is. And then at the bottom we have tests. Now this test counts if I open this up as selectors. Now this test is a test that is placed on everything, so including the payment loot and including the buffs. So not just only the payment loots or only the buffs, no, on the whole loot action. So in this case I have tested it at a age, so a sim info, which is ages specified teen, young adult, adults and elder, which just means that children, toddlers and infants and babies cannot receive this loot. So now this loot is only added to teens, young adults, adults or elder sims. Then we can also place test on a loot itself. So we could place only a test on payments or only a test on buffs. So like I said, the bottom test is for every single different kind of loot, and then we could also specify in the loots itself. So we have a payment loot over here, and we could also add a test to that. So now it says that the payment of 100 simoleons will not be given to sims with the trait snob. So with the snob trait, it is blacklisted, which means not be given. If we would have added something into whitelist, if we would have said snob whitelist, it would mean that snobs will be the only one who will be receiving this payment. Now this is not money given payments. Payment means it is taken out of their household funds. And then the other test I have added is to the buff, which means that this buff will now only be given to young adults. Let's for example say we have an interaction. In the interaction, once it's finished, we have an outcome, and in this outcome is this loot. Now let's say we're playing with a child sim, we would not receive anything in this loot action. Now if we would be playing with a teen sim, it does mean that we receive the payment of 100 simoleons and we will not be given the buff. Now if we were a young adult, it will mean that we need to pay 100 simoleons and we will also receive the buff. Now if our young adult would be a snob, it would mean they will not have to do the payment and they will only receive the buff. I hope that kind of makes sense. Now before we move on to modifiers, I do want to say that yes, you can give tests with different tests. I hope that makes sense. For example, we could have this a buff test over here. Let's say our sim will need to be a young adult and also have a certain trait. Now to do that, we opening the buff, so here is the buff, and then we go down to tests, and then we have the V over here, and I'm going to click on the plus sign over here. Now I'm going to say trait, so let's add a trait, and I'm going to do a whitelist trait. Let's go with, I don't know, need. That's like the first trait that popped in my head. So in this case, now to receive this buff, our sim needs to be and a young adult and have the need trait. Now we could also do this differently. We could say our sim needs to be a young adult, or they need to have the need trait. In order to do that, I'm going to remove from the V over here. I'm just going to say delete, and then I'm going to click on the plus sign, the bottom one, which starts now with L. So and now I'm going to say trait whitelist, and then click on need. So now we have two different tests on the buff. Now it's either my sim needs to be a young adult, or they need to have the need trait. Now the only difference between these two is the L. So if it starts from the L to L, it means or, and then if it starts from V, it means my sim needs to be a young adult and needs to have the need trait. So that is the difference between the V and the L starting. So this one from L to L here is one set, so this means and then this one from L to L is just or. So my sim will need to be either a young adult and have the need trait, or they will just only have to have the need trait. I know using the same trait is maybe a bit confusing, so let me just quickly choose a different trait. So and now it says my sim needs to be a young adult and have the need trait, or have the lazy trait, and then they could be any age. Okay, so I hope that makes sense now. And you can do that for anything. So anything where you can put tests on, you can do the tests in that way. So if you have any questions about tests, please feel free to ask those questions in the comments down below. Let's move on to modifiers. Now modifiers work different from tests. Now modifiers I have only put on the loot payment over here, so I'm going to turn off the buff, and then we're going to have a look at the payment loot. So here they are called cost modifiers, but then here in the buff they would be called multipliers, which is just the same thing, but in the loot it will be a chance, whereas I have placed them here as a modifier for the cost. So if I turn that on, we get a whole new list over here, as you can see. Now the most important thing that is always the base value. Now in this case, like I said, the payment cost is 100 simoleons, so our sim needs to pay 100 simoleons. So the base value right now is set to 1, which means it will just be 100 simoleons. If I would set this to 2, it would turn into 200 simoleons. So it is basically 1 just stands for like 100% of the price. And this could also count then for the buffs, which we have here chance, which says base chance 100, which means the same thing. So this is 100% chance your sim will get that buff. As you might have noticed, they are worded a little bit different, but they're all the same thing. So now when we open the multiplier, we will have here cost modifiers, base value 1, and then the start of the multipliers. In the multipliers we have tests. So we just went over tests earlier, but that is basically how the multipliers work. Now I've set this multiplier to 2, which works the same as the base value. So in this case, this just means the original price times 2, which means it will turn into 200 simoleons. Now, in order for the multiplier to work, we do need to add a test. In this case, I've placed a test for lazy sims. So if my sim is lazy, then my sim will need to pay 200 simoleons instead of the 100 simoleons. So the original price is multiplied by 2. And then another one I wanted to show you is a multiplier which is 0.5. Now this means it is actually half price. So because the base value is set to 1, we would now divide it. So we have 100 simoleons times 0.5 will turn into 50 simoleons. And then for the test, I have set it to infant, toddler, child, and teen, so all the kids have to pay half price. Now, if we would set the base value to 2, things suddenly change. So now our base value is not 100 simoleons anymore, it is 100 times 2, which means it's 200 simoleons. Now for the multiplier, if my sim has the lazy trait, it will be times 2, so it becomes 2 times 200, which will turn into 400 simoleons. And then for the multiplier on the children, it will be half price, so instead of 200, it will turn into 100. Now I do have to say, this whole multiplier system is literally brings me back to high school. And all the days doing math, but yes, that's basically what it is all about. Now, if we have a look at the multiplier chance over here, it is already set to 100, which means that any sim will have a 100% chance that they will receive this buff. Now, if I would only set the base chance to 50, it just means like there's now a 50% chance that my sim might receive this buff. For this, we could of course again then add multipliers, and let's say if we do a 2 multiplier, it will turn the 50 into there's a 100% chance my sim would receive it. So if we would say, for example, we add it to a sim's age, we could say age here, and then let's say just adults. So now there is a 100% chance that adults will receive the buff because we have set the multiplier to 2, and 2 times 50 is 100. So I hope that makes sense. Now, one other thing I kind of wanted to go over with is random loots. For example, I just grab the random weighted loot because these have weights. Now, every single weight also comes with multipliers, and this could just be as simple as just leaving the weight, just having the base value set to 1, and you could just leave it like that. Let's make sure actually to also just add a buff or something in here, so this will not look as confusing as it does right now. Now for the weighted stuff, I do not recommend using the chance really, because it doesn't always work. I've had issues with it before, but the weight multipliers work perfectly. So yeah, now we have, let's say, 2 buffs over here. Maybe just to, I'm just going to click on something, and then for the first one as well, so I'm just going to buffs and then click on that one. So now let's say there's the same interaction, and then instead of getting a loot, we actually receive a random weighted loot. Now, random weighted loot are always like you receive one of these random things. So if you just have this weight set to base value 1, then it means there is the same amount of chance my sim would receive this rejected by lover buff and the buff skill fishing caught large fish buff. They're so off topic, these buffs, but anyways, it doesn't matter what kind of buffs I have in here. Now, because the first one is a lover buff, I'm just going to say, let's say if my sim has the romantic traits, and then let's set the multiplier to 2. So now there is a 2 times higher chance that my sim with the romantic trait will receive this buff. Now this multiplier only counts for this buff, and it basically now means that the base value of this buff, if my sim has the romantic trait, is 2, and this one is set to 1, which just means that there's a higher chance for my sim with the romantic trait to receive the rejected by lover buff. buff. Now, one other thing I want to mention as well is just adding a 0. And if you add the 0, it means there is no chance that my sim would receive this buff. If my sim would be a romantic, there's no chance they will receive the rejected by lover buff, so they will automatically always be given, in this case, the buff skill fishing called large fish, because 0 times 1 is 0. So that was it on tests and multipliers. I hope it makes sense. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video or thought this video was helpful, then don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more Sims 4 content, and I'll see you in the next video.